Welcome back to Kings of Columbus. I'm Bill Landis. No Doug Maurice this week. Apologies for those of you who were hoping to see Doug's gorgeous mug on this here YouTube channel or listen to his voice wherever you might find podcasts. He is in Las Vegas covering Big 12 Media Days for Kings of the North. So you'll have to deal with me, but not just me. We have some guests. We'll get to that in a second. Before then, do implore you to go check out Kings of the North if you haven't done so already. Got, as I said, Big 12 Media Days coverage going on there. This week, Big 10 Media Days are coming up in 2 weeks in Indianapolis. We, of course, will be there covering Ohio State. As we always do, we'll be there covering it for Kings of the North as well. So you'll get full coverage of Big 10 Media Days if you're into that sort of thing, not just Ohio State. So again, check that out if you haven't already, and appreciate those of you who have done so already. So this episode of Kings of the North, or Kings of Columbus, I do too many shows, is previewing Ohio State's toughest three opponents. That, of course, is Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. And to do that, I have three guests joining me to talk about each of those teams. First, we'll have Tyson Alger, who covers Oregon for the I-5 corridor. Check them out if you're interested in more Oregon coverage. He'll tell us a little bit more about the Ducks. Then we have Audrey Snyder of The Athletic, who you may have seen before on the podcast daily. She covers Penn State. She'll let us know a little bit more about the Nittany Lions and Drew Aller and James Franklin and a different world for Penn State in the expanded playoffs. That was an interesting conversation. And then lastly, we're joined by Aaron McMann, who covers Michigan for MLive.com, to talk about all the things that are changing up in Ann Arbor coming off of their national championship season and what might be perhaps a different dynamic in the game this year, with Michigan going through a bit of a transition and Ohio State loaded up. I thought that was interesting conversation as well. So enough listening to me, enough of you just staring at my face and listening to just my voice. Let's get into the conversations about Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan, starting with Tyson Alger and those Oregon Ducks. We start off our look at Ohio State's toughest opponents this season with the Oregon Ducks, and we are joined by Tyson Alger. He covers Oregon for the I-5 corridor. Tyson, we appreciate your time here, man. New team to the Big Ten. I think people are still trying to figure out what exactly Oregon is all about, and we'll get into that. But I want to ask you just off the top here, what is the anticipation like in Eugene for this game when Ohio State comes to Alton Stadium in October?
Yeah, I think it's going to be an all-timer. I've been on the beat for this will be, I think, my 11th season. And I think to date so far, the biggest non-conference game that I've been around for was probably in 2014 when Michigan State came to town, because I think it was a top 10 matchup, and that was a special year for the Ducks. But to have a season that has, I guess, similar expectations to that one in 2014, and then coupling that with the move to the Big Ten, and then obviously the fact that Ohio State has similar expectations as the Ducks. I think it's going to just be an absolutely amazing atmosphere for that one.
So I like Ohio State fans, probably the most raucous environment that Ohio State is used to, at least within the conference, is Penn State. And I don't know if you've been to Beaver Stadium or not, so I won't ask you to compare it necessarily, but I guess I'll just ask you, like, what is Eugene like? What is Autzen like on a big game day? What should Ohio State fans who might be making the trip and the team itself, what should they expect from that?
Yeah, it's that time of year. It's going to probably be drizzly. There's a chance that it might be sunny, but it's probably going to be gray and drizzly and sleepy. The tailgating atmosphere is pretty awesome. It's all kind of centered around like kind of these main parking lots around the stadium. Autzen isn't the biggest stadium, especially now in the new conference that they're in. It sits about mid 55, 56, close to 60, maybe if they're really pushing it. But it's a stadium that really just kind of like digs into, like, it's half of it feels like it's underground. And so like the fans really feel like they're on top of you, and it echoes in through there. And it's pretty, especially like in what used to be like the former Pac-12 footprint, like you'd get some pretty consistently decent crowds from like Washington, Utah, and this isn't being like the homer bias to it. Like Oregon was the only like consistently like just gonna be like a in your face home crowd advantage in that conference. Because I mean, like even like looking at USC, I covered probably 5 games at the Coliseum over the last decade, and I can't think of a single one where it wasn't at least like 50% empty, just because of the size of that thing. So yeah, it's it's a unique atmosphere, especially because like you are 2 hours away from Portland. So it does feel like it's like this big stadium that's kind of like popping out of the middle of just kind of this big green valley.
So like it's obvious. I think everyone knows that Oregon and Ohio State are like two of probably like, I don't know, 4 to 6 teams that have like very legitimate national title aspirations this year. I am wondering though, more like sort of generally long-term program wise, like what does Oregon want to be? Like, does Oregon want to be in the Big Ten what Ohio State has been, which is just like, that's the team you got to go through if you want to win this conference and you want to get to the playoff and you want to win a national title? Or is it more realistic to be like a Penn State, which should probably make the playoff more often than not, but isn't necessarily harboring national title aspirations year after year?
It's funny because if this would have happened about a decade ago, I think it would have been more of that second one, because that's kind of how the Ducks were positioned for a long time in the Pac-12, Pac-10 too. It was, for a long time, USC was kind of the big power, and Oregon would kind of stage its years around that. But I think over the last 10 years, and maybe even going back to like when Mario Cristobal took over in Eugene, and they became like really, really gaga over like the recruiting aspect of things and talent acquisition, and having kind of their names in the same offseason conversations as like the Ohio States and Alabamas and Georgias. And I think Oregon really likes that. And I think a lot of this move and abandoning the history and tradition that they have here on the West Coast and saying goodbye to Oregon State, I think part of the sacrifice of that is Oregon assuming or wanting to be an Ohio State. Like, I don't think they're doing this to try to be an also-ran in the conference. And I think that you're kind of seeing that this offseason as well with some of the successes that they're having on the recruiting trail.
Yeah, and some of those successes have come at the expense of Ohio State, obviously. And there's some interesting crossover here now with Carlos Lachlan coming from Oregon, and like not a, I wouldn't say 100% amicable departure. It didn't seem like from Oregon. Maybe it felt like Carlos Lachlan felt a bit slighted maybe by Oregon's attempts maybe to keep him in Eugene. You might know more about that than I do, but that was kind of my view on it. But I mentioned that only to say, like, this feels like something. This feels like something's brewing between these two programs that I do think has legs. That, like, I don't think it's awesome that it starts this year with both of them being as good as we think they're going to be and playing what's going to be an absolute banger of a game in Alson. But it feels like year after year now, I almost wonder if like Oregon might supplant Penn State as that sort of number 2 team behind Michigan, obviously, that's always sort of in Ohio State's crosshairs. And I wonder, like, for Oregon, that is Ohio State the number 1 team that is now in Oregon's crosshairs.
It's an interesting situation for the Ducks too, because like, in the last, since 2010, as they've become kind of one of the more popular and consistently good teams in the country, for a while they did that when USC was under sanctions and they were down, and Oregon and USC never really had a true like 100% on 100% rivalry during like peak on peak sort of thing. The Ducks and Washington have gone back and forth the last couple of years in some really good games, but that's definitely like a natural rival. So like Ohio State kind of offers like this completely unique to what Oregon's used to, because it's an opponent that doesn't really have any like big flaws. I'm just trying to think of like, if you're an Oregon fan, of like, what can you pick apart with Ohio State? And unlike just about any other like rival that they've had over the last 20 years, like it's kind of power on power there. And I think both programs are obviously set up for the long haul here.
I want to drill down a little bit more specifically on some players on both sides of the ball. But before that, Dan Lanning this is his 3rd year at Oregon. He's 22-5, has been very successful, but he has lost most of the big games he's coached in.
Yeah.
What does this game mean to Dan Lanning? Like, I know they have other big ones. I think they play Michigan before they play Ohio State. Is that right? I can't remember. There are other big games. There are other big games on the schedule. Suffice to say, but what would a win against Ohio State mean for Dan Lanning in terms of like narrative and what people think about his ability to actually win the games that Oregon needs to win?
It's a huge one, because I mean, like as you said, like the guy's got a pretty darn good record for being, going into his 3rd year as a head coach, but for the job he was hired for, like he was hired to win at Oregon and win right away. And the fact that like he really kind of plays into the spotlight, the spotlight, and dating back to that Colorado game, the cameras were in the locker room before the game, and the
Yeah.
whole we're not playing for clicks. And I think it's important for Lanning's reputation. Like he's a coach who's known now. It's not kind of like that anonymous coach out in Eugene, but the Ducks are pretty darn good at winning the off-season news cycle these days. Like they've been really good at that, especially compared to how the program's been before. They really became focused on recruiting, but between like the two big losses to Washington, the three big losses to Washington, I think this is a massive one, especially as like you're kind of like setting the foundation for how this rivalry is going to be kind of approached moving forward.
Yeah. Oregon offensively is interesting to me because I look at a team that lost a first round quarterback, a second round center, and a receiver and a running back in the fourth round of the draft. Like just a lot of talent left.
Yeah.
And it seems like the expectation is like, no, we're good. We're fine. We've reloaded the way we need to reload. We'll be just fine. So are there actually any concerns with what Oregon might be offensively, or at least their ability to maintain what was a pretty good offense last year?
Yeah. Maintain, I think, is the word that like we should be looking for there, because Oregon was a really good offensive team last year. I think especially here in Eugene, the end of the season got a little bit sour just because of like who they lost to. But for much of the year, like, Bo Nix was in the Heisman conversation and Oregon was running. I think they finished with the number 2 offense in the nation. So yeah, they lost some like really big key pieces from that. But you're losing like one quarterback with 16,000 career passing yards and replacing him with a dude with like 14,000 career passing yards. They have Noah Whittington, who 2 years ago, him and Bucky Irving split carries at running back, and now he's back and healthy. He's going to be splitting carries with Jordan James at running back. Their wide receiver position's probably as deep as it's ever been. I know they lost Troy Franklin last year, but Tez Johnson's coming back. He caught like 86 passes last year. They have a lot of young talent coming up. So like the offense is really talented. They've been able to patch things with the portal too. I'm still in like that old school like mentality of thinking that it's not just as easy as like plugging and playing like guys through the portal, and thinking that there's like, I think chemistry matters and cohesion and learning how to play with each other. So that's actually why like that Ohio State game, I think is really interesting, because traditionally most of Oregon's like really big rivalry games have come later in the year. And this one's kind of, I think they play UCLA their first Big Ten game, but then like this is the big next run up for them. And so a lot of moving pieces there, and that's kind of the same for their defense as well too. Like they put a lot of dudes in the draft, and the whole secondary I think could be new portal guys starting this fall.
Yeah, I mean Ohio State will be dealing with some of that too, right? Kind of the spine of their offense, center, quarterback, running back is all transfers. They'll at least have a test with Iowa before they have to go to play at Oregon. But I think both teams might be still trying to figure out kind of how all the pieces fit together when they do meet in October. So that'll be interesting to monitor. Dillon Gabriel in this offense, is he just going to plug and play, do all the stuff that Bo Nix did? Is there going to be anything different about this offense with Dillon Gabriel's skill set?
I think it's going to be a lot of the same stuff. It's going to be going the other direction just because he's a lefty. But, it was interesting watching Bo the last couple of years, because his first year in Oregon, when Kenny Dillingham was OC, they definitely ran him a lot more. I think obviously you sometimes make some concessions with quarterbacks when they decide to come back for another year. Maybe you don't want to bang them up so much, but I don't see Gabriel being quite as used as like a brute running back sometimes like that. They would use Nix, sometimes Nix would just be a battering ram and they just tell him to go for it. But I think you're still going to see a lot of stuff, a lot of short, medium throws, a lot of slants, a lot of getting the ball out quickly. I think Tez Johnson might catch 90 balls this year.
Yeah.
They seem they've already developed that sort of chemistry. So I wouldn't expect it to be a very large reinventing of the wheel here.
I think Oregon probably comes into the Big Ten with the best offensive tackle tandem in the conference, with Josh Connerly and AJ Cornelius. Is the middle of that offensive line going to be okay, like ready for what they need to do this year?
Yeah, I'm really interested to see what Poncho can do at center. You're replacing Jackson Powers Johnson, who that was a fun career to watch because he came to Oregon as just like this. You know when like guys start putting together like a recruiting class and there's that one like slightly less rated guy in the class who starts becoming like the big rah like let's get everybody else in.
Yeah.
That was Jackson Powers Johnson, and then he ended up being better than all those dudes. And so to kind of have to replace that up the middle, I think is going to be key. But they have a guy who they think is going to be pretty stable in that, even though they're young. But yeah, just having Cornelius and Connerly at those tackles positions, those guys are very, very good. They're both going to be in the league here in a couple of years. So I think that the Ducks can kind of build around that.
I was monitoring some things like very early on in the off season with Oregon, and it seemed like beefing up that defensive line was a real priority for them. And they went out and added a couple of defensive tackles. Jamari Caldwell from Houston and was it Derek Carmen from Michigan State. So are they good up front? Like, are there any concerns with that group? Is because they lost a lot, right? They lost both the top 4 tackles from last year, right?
Yeah, they lost some guys. They lost Brandon Dorless, who was like a 4-year starter for them and like just a really effective guy. But like getting Jordan Birch back was big. The line is definitely where they patched through the portal a lot. Getting Caldwell, getting the Michigan State dude. But like it's just one of those things where like the talent looks really good on paper and the coaches are saying, the right things during the spring. But like it's, I don't think we're going to truly know the depth of that front seven until you do play in Ohio State, because I think at this point, everyone's so talented that you're going to be able to have like a certain baseline over like the first 4 opponents that you play during the season. But, the 4 opponents you play first are quite different than Ohio State.
Yeah, right. One of those guys up front who I'm interested in, and I think Ohio State fans are probably interested in because it seemed like at a time he might pick the Buckeyes out of high school, is Mateo Uiagalelei. Is there a chance that he like breaks out and is a dude this year, or is he maybe you think so?
I think he's going to be a pretty a game breaker for them. Him and both like Tatum Tuioti, they're both same class. They both come off the edge like that. Mateo is just physically impressive. Like when you like watch them like walk out of practice, like he's just a big kid. Like even when he came in and he was like 17, 18 years old, like you could just kind of like see like that body and like that length and explosiveness. And I really think that he's going to be a big impact player for them this season.
So is there anything concerning on defense? I know like they're trying to piece it together a little bit too in the secondary with some guys. It seems like they addressed it quite well, but like when you look at the defense, is there anything you think to yourself like, oh, this could be an issue when they play Ohio State?
That secondary is what I think about the most. And like they patched it with good players. They got Jabbar Muhammad from Washington, who like had a couple key picks against the Ducks last year. Like they're replacing guys at safety, they're replacing guys at other corner. Again, like on paper, if you go on like 247 and do like the talent rankings of this year's team, like it's going to say Oregon secondary is really, really good. But when you're potentially going to have 4 new starters in it, like it's just one of those things of like, you're going to be tested earlier in the year and then you're going to be tested against Ohio State. And, the Pac-12 for as decent as it was last year, like it still didn't harbor like a whole bunch of just like brace yourself offenses to prepare for. And, that's what Ohio State presents for them. So.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting test for Ohio State's offense too. Because like I said, I don't know. Their buildup is similar aside from the Iowa game. So I don't know if they'll be hitting on all cylinders when they go to Oregon either. So that'll be interesting. Last thing I want to ask you that I've asked, or I will ask our other guests, is there anyone on Oregon's roster, and maybe Oregon probably is uniquely positioned because they do have a lot of transfers, I guess, that maybe is not getting a lot of notoriety that people aren't talking about so much this time of year, but you think, by the time October 12th rolls around, might be a pretty important piece and pretty important player in that game?
He's not a new player, and like he's decently known around here, but like, Terrence Ferguson's a really good tight end, and he's been really consistent for them the last, I guess, like 2.5 years, and he's just steadily been getting better. And so I think like the tandem of him and Patrick Herbert has actually been really steady for them the last year. Herbert's finally gotten himself healthy. He's kind of trying to shed the label of just being known as, the younger brother of the Chargers quarterback. But that's another big freakishly athletic dude. And I think it's a position that Oregon doesn't get talked about a lot, just because they have a lot of like freakishly skilled guys elsewhere, but like they're very strong at tight end.
Yeah, I'm just so excited for this game. It's like it's a heavyweight fight. Like I don't. Ohio State has had some good. I was going to say non-conference. This is a conference game now. Opponents that get you really excited, but nothing quite to this level. This feels like something different.
Well, and there's just like so much build up to it too, because there was the canceled game, during the COVID year. Yeah. There was the fact that the Ducks, like still surprisingly so to me, went in and won that game in Columbus. Like Oregon, and this is again part of that move. Like Oregon fans really think they're a part of, like, they deserve to be like at the throne of like big time football, and like this is a big time football game, and like the town's going to go absolutely nuts for it.
Yeah, hopefully Ohio State has figured out how to defend a crack sweep and won't get burned 3 times by the same play this time around. Although it's probably worth trying if you're Oregon to see if they figured it out.
Yeah, you got to check out the Anthony Brown Trophy on campus when you guys can come through. It's
That's funny. All right. Well, like I said, we're really excited about it. We appreciate you, Tyson, joining us here on Kings of Columbus to give us a little more info about the Ducks, as Ohio State is staring down the barrel of one of the bigger regular season games they've had in my time covering the team over 10 years. So we're looking forward to it. Thanks again for your time. We appreciate you joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Very happy to welcome back to Kings of Columbus, friend of the podcast, Audrey Snyder. She covers Penn State for The Athletic. Audrey, I know you've been on the podcast daily before, but I think this is your first time on Kings of Columbus. We're happy to have you. How you doing?
I'm good. Kings and Queens of Columbus today.
That's right. We'll expand it to Kings and Queens of Columbus, although you are in State College, Pennsylvania, and not in Columbus like that. That's fine. Semantics. We'll let it slide. We're going to talk about the Penn State Nittany Lions, one of the 3 biggest opponents for Ohio State, obviously, in 2024. Ohio State has to go to Happy Valley this year. I want to start, Audrey, with a more of like a bigger picture question about like what this season should be for Penn State. I think when a lot of people think about the expanded college football playoff, like the program probably they think of first and foremost is Penn State, team that's not gotten into the 4-team playoff, but I think reasonably should get into the 12-team playoff most years. And James Franklin's tenure has kind of been defined by being sort of good, but not quite good enough to reach that threshold. And I look at the schedule that Penn State has, and I think to myself, well, if they're anything worse than 10-2, I would imagine people are going to be pretty upset. And if Penn State's 10-2, they should make the playoff. So what I'm asking is it playoff or bust for James Franklin as the Nittany Lions get ready for 2024?
I think so, Bill. Absolutely. I think it's not only playoff or bust. I think it's get in the playoffs and actually win a game. To me, that's the barometer of success. And now you're right. I mean, when people think about beneficiaries of the 12-team playoff, Penn State's like the poster boy for that.
Yeah.
But it still comes back to, if you get in the playoff, you still have to beat a really good team. And that's where this program has struggled. That's where the 3-17 against the AP top 10 teams during James Franklin's tenure, like that to me is the thing. Now it is kind of funny because you say 10-2, and this is where I think, everybody has to kind of reframe their brains a little bit this year. Before it was like, 10-2 with losses to Ohio State and Michigan. Fans are mad. They want to fire everybody. Now it's like, 10-2, and you're probably in the playoff. I mean, it is
probably hosting a home playoff game if you're 10-2, right?
Can you imagine, Bill? This place, State College, trying to host a playoff game?
No, I cannot. Yeah. No, I've longed for the Winter Classic to come to Beaver Stadium to see the Flyers and Penguins play, and like the pushback on that has always been like, it's too cold, the logistics of it. It's like, you're going to play a football game like in the middle of December. Why can't you play a hockey game now in January?
They've had to make a lot of changes to the stadium within the past year just to be able to host a playoff game. Like there was a lot of behind the scenes stuff that structurally Beaver Stadium was not equipped to do. So they had to make sure literally reinforce pipes to make sure the pipes wouldn't freeze and these types of things that nobody should be thinking about when hosting a playoff game, but that you have to. So they're in the midst of a multi-year $700 million renovation to the stadium. But the first thing was making sure within this past offseason that they could take care of everything to be able to host. But eventually, Bill, Winter Classic is going to be on the table. I think you mentioned it, Flyers, Penguins. I mean, it's a slam dunk. They had a concert there, Luke Combs, earlier this spring. So yeah, there's going to be more uses, but fans will not care about those uses unless one of them is a playoff game.
Right. So Ohio State will go there in November. So hopefully it won't be frigid winter conditions for that game. Probably be a noon kickoff though, right? Are we thinking that they're going to get the big noon treatment again?
I'm thinking so, because now I guess because the other one is Michigan, Oregon that day, right? I believe so.
I think
and
that's
so
right. Yeah.
those are the two. But now I can't see it now. Obviously, if you're Penn State and they made this clear, they want Ohio State at night because they want it to be the whiteout. Well, you don't always get what you want, especially not in this day and age of television. So could be noon. I think could be 3:30 as well. So Ohio State might not get the whiteout because fans are very up in arms that they want the whiteout to only be for a night game. So we might be living in a world, potentially, Penn State hasn't said the whiteout opponent yet, but we could be living in a world where, say, you get like Illinois for a whiteout because it's at night, and Ohio State maybe gets like a stripe out or gets nothing because it's just, it's weird.
So I'm wondering like how big of a deal is that in at Penn State? Because I think like in Columbus, like they're very happy to not have to play at Beaver Stadium at night. I think it is pretty drastically different. It's still loud, but I think this like the vibes. You don't have to wait around all day and let the nerves kind of like seep in and maybe alter the way you play. So is Penn State like angry that now Fox sort of controls the fate of this game and has made it so like really, I guess realistically, whenever probably Ohio State, Oregon, or Michigan come to Beaver Stadium, it's more than likely going to be a noon game.
Absolutely. Yeah, they're not happy. And I think that's it's the fans are around all day. They're tailgating all day. They are drinking all day. By the time they get in that stadium at night, it is next level. Yeah. And I think too, yes, the whiteout, the visual of it looks much better at night. Like I get it, but also like it's a bit of a marketing thing too, in that for some fans, this is in college football in general, not just with either team, like this is a bucket list item. So people want to be part of it. So part of me, the skeptic in me, Bill, and that's how, again, the journalist, the skeptic in me says, well, okay, if Big Noon, say, is going to hold the cards here and make this a noon game, if you're Penn State, then you maybe go and say, well, you know what, Illinois, after the last time they were here in 9 overtimes in a game that people want to forget, maybe we do make that the whiteout because that very well could be a night game. And yeah, we're going to sell a lot of tickets if it's a whiteout, right? You're going to get a really good crowd either way because your season ticket base is over 90,000. But if you make it a whiteout, maybe you make a little more money. Again, that's the skeptic in me. You could also say maybe you do it for UCLA or Washington this year. For me, I've got some very strong feelings that it should not be Washington because that is the week after Ohio State comes to town for your biggest game of the year. Like that's the game.
Body blow game. Yeah.
Yeah. If it was me, if I was the AD, if I was pulling all the strings here, I don't care if it's not at night. That should be your whiteout. That is your biggest home game of the year. You need that crowd cranked up to 12 to give yourself any shot of trying to beat Ohio State.
All right, so let's talk about this Penn State team kind of more on the field. I think good roster. We'll talk about that, but I think the headlines of the offseason anyway are 2 new coordinators. Andy Koltelnicki comes over to run the offense from Kansas. Let's start with him. He replaces your friend and mine, Mike Yurcich, who had 1 year at Ohio State. Yeah.
Friend of the podcast, friend of Kings of Columbus, maybe.
He's never been on. He's never been on. Although I don't know what he's doing now. So I think he didn't go anywhere, right?
No. He had a couple interviews. Last I saw he was still in State College, where they had the Elite 11 here, conveniently in State College when I was on vacation. And was not here, but Mike was there. He was helping at Elite 11. So.
Oh wow, good for him. Anyway, he gets replaced because his offenses at Penn State stunk. So he gets replaced by Andy Koltelnicki again from Kansas. What is the expectation, I guess, for how this offense will look different under Andy Koltelnicki as opposed to what it's been the last couple of years under Mike Yurcich?
Yeah, I mean, to me, it feels like you're at the revolving door stage of this with your OCs, and you're bringing in a new guy in which the offense was not nearly explosive enough last year. To me, it's still concerning, alarming that here we are Drew Aller's going into year 3, and I still have fans asking me, is he any good? Right? That's a problem that we don't like. I can't give you a definitive answer to that question right now as he's going into his second year as a starter. Receiving core is problematic, which we can get to Julian Fleming probably in a little bit.
We sure will. Yeah.
Yes. Penn State's going to ask a lot of him. But yeah, you're looking and hoping that this is a guy who can quickly revamp an offense to make it creative, multiple. I mean, so much of what he's been able to do throughout his career has been doing more with less. He's never had a roster with this much talent. He's a guy who players have raved about. I talked with, when he was hired in the winter, I talked to his former quarterbacks elsewhere. Tyree Jackson was one of them, Jarrett Patterson at Buffalo. And you look at, kind of what the running backs have been able to do. And it goes back to that creativity and his willingness to try different things. You're going to see a lot of motion, right? Like that's, to me, that's what this offense should be. I think where fans are still getting alarmed, and I get it, is James Franklin keeps saying something along the lines of, well, it's not going to be drastically different than what we've done here in the past. And it's like, that's not what people want to hear. Like, Penn State's going to bank on the things that they had success with in the past. But it is going to be a different offense, even if he's not going to come out and say it. And it needs to be, right? Like you have the 5-star quarterback. Your 2022 recruiting class was built for this year. Go and figure it out.
Yeah, that's my biggest question with it. It's like, I like the hire. In theory, it's great. Is James Franklin going to let Andy Koltonicki do what he wants to do? Or is he going to put the reins on him in any way? Like just kind of play it conservatively. Like when James Franklin said throughout all of last year that he liked the fact that Drew Aller didn't take chances, I was like, I wouldn't if I were a Penn State fan. So I look at an offense that needs to be unshackled a little bit, and I think Andy Koltonicki is the guy to do it, provided that James Franklin actually lets him do it.
And here's the other interesting wrinkle to this is that, Yurcich obviously was also the quarterback's coach. So Koltonicki comes in and he's going to be kind of almost like a lot of NFL teams do, where he's like the roving guy, the roving coach. He's the OC, but he'll pop in and out of other meetings. So he doesn't have a position group. So Danny O'Brien, who was James Franklin's guy at Maryland as quarterback, who's been here as an analyst, as a GA, currently is still a grad assistant. He's also the quarterback's coach. Now, the guys love Danny O'Brien. He's recruited everybody in that room. James Franklin thinks he's a rising star in the profession. I put all of this out there to say, if Drew Aller struggles, there's going to be a narrative of how in the world did you do this when you let the guy be directly coached by a grad assistant, right?
Yeah.
Which is unusual. It's a unique wrinkle, but they do think really, really highly of Danny O'Brien. I sat down with Danny in the spring to kind of outline how in the world does this work, which is going to be interesting. But I do think, that's kind of another interesting level to it when you look at it.
So when that hire was made at offensive coordinator, Doug Lesmerises and I also do Kings of the North, where we talk more broadly about kind of regional stuff. And we talked about the fit with the offense and Andy Koltonicki and Drew Aller, and we were wondered aloud, is it possible that Bo Pribula is a better fit for what Andy Koltonicki might want to do? How do you, is this going to be in any way a 2-quarterback system that Penn State's going to run this year?
I think Pribula is going to have a role in some way, shape, or form. Now, what that looks like, I don't know yet. But I do. I mean, we saw it at Kansas, right? We've seen Andy have success with 2 quarterbacks. They love Pribula's athleticism. I know it's always, for most fan bases, the most interesting guy on any roster is the backup quarterback. That's certainly the case here, especially when he's from Pennsylvania. There's that extra level to it of guys, fans want to see him on the field. But I think he's going to have some kind of role. But again, the fact that Drew Aller year 3, and we still don't really know who or what he is, to me, that's kind of the storyline here, and that's what you have to focus on. But it is a very fair point to bring up, Bill. Again, but when you keep going back and say, it's going to be similar to this offense to what we did, and I keep thinking that's not this track record of what Andy's done. So.
What does progress for Drew Aller look like in your mind?
I think it's, you mentioned earlier, of kind of cutting him loose. I think it's that. To me, last year, he definitely looked like a quarterback who was afraid to make a mistake. He had a really good offensive line in front of him. and you would have never guessed it based off of some of the throws that he was making. I also am a firm believer that Penn State did not put him in a position to succeed last year, right? That offense was a mess. They knew going into the year that the receiving core was not good enough, but they hoped it would get there, and it didn't. So here you go again, and your receiving core is still the question mark. But then you say, okay, your offensive line should still be good, but it's not going to be as good. You don't have a top 10 pick at left tackle waiting over there. But for me, it's, again, this guy, and I get it, recruiting rankings are wrong sometimes, right? But this guy has the arm talent, and it either he's not what anybody thought coming out of the recruiting process, or else they need to kind of reset this guy, rebuild some confidence, get him on the same page with his receivers, hope that those guys stay healthy, which, by the way, that's going to be a big narrative here too, because Julian Fleming and Trey Wallace, those are the guys, and health, as the Ohio State fans know, has not always been Julian Fleming's best friend. Right. So you got to have all that working together, but to me, success for Drew Aller is looking comfortable, looking confident, and letting it rip, throwing the ball down the field, and making some of those throws that you'd see him make, but then you'd see like some of those interceptions where you're just like, what in the world is he doing? The consistency piece to me is a lot of what's been missing here.
Last thing on the offense is Julian Fleming. We were surprised, I think, when he decided to transfer. I think we all thought he might just try to go pro and make whatever money he could make as long as his body would hold up for him. Because as you mentioned, it kind of betrayed him a lot when he was here at Ohio State. For everything I've read about him, he's feeling really good about how he feels physically this offseason. Is he, especially in a world now where Keandre Lambert-Smith has transferred, is Julian Fleming like unequivocally wide receiver 1 at Penn State going into this season?
I would say it's a 1A, 1B situation in Fleming and Harrison Wallace. But the big caveat to all of this is I think tight end Tyler Warren is going to get a lot of opportunities in this offense. And I think he's somebody that, like, I would not be shocked, which this might sound weird. I would not be shocked if their leading receptions guy is Tyler Warren, right? Like, if you have a tight end lead you in receptions, it could happen with this offense. But yeah, the receiving core is a problem. You go out, you get Julian Fleming, and you're banking that you've got 1 year to get it right. And he had said that when we talked to him in the spring, that he had contemplated, do you go pro? But he said he wanted to like bet on himself, wanted to prove to everybody what he can be when he's healthy. And so it's been so far so good. But I think Trey Wallace, Harrison Wallace III goes by Trey. Makes sense, right? He's somebody who I think when healthy could be a surprise, like a sleeper pick in the Big Ten, just in terms of extremely explosive athlete. There was a video a couple years ago, him in the weight room, just literally like jumping up. They put this overhang in the weight room that they're like, oh, we'll put it here. No one's ever going to come anywhere near touching this. And this guy just leaps up and taps it, right? So I think he's a special athlete. But again, he was hurt most of last year, and that kind of was what James Franklin kept saying last year was, well, part of the reason why our offense isn't explosive is because we don't have Trey Wallace. And then they thought they'd get him back, and he got hurt again. So, yeah, I wouldn't say Fleming is unequivocally the top guy, but it's slim pickings around here, Bill. He certainly has a shot to be the guy.
I lied. I have one more offensive question. Because I was reminded about Caden Saunders, Ohio kid.
Westerville.
Went to one of the Westervilles. I don't know. There's 3 Westerville high schools. I can't keep track of who goes where.
You know what? That's because, yes. And I found that out after I called the wrong Westerville one year to ask somebody about Caden. And the coach is like, yeah, that's the wrong school. So, yeah.
There's too many Westervilles and there's too many Olentangis in Columbus. Any chance for Caden Saunders to like emerge as an important piece for this offense this year?
I would say chance because it's wide open. There is another Ohio guy in there as well, Liam Clifford, brother of Sean Clifford.
That's right.
Who's still around, another Ohio guy. And he's somebody that, again, you say maybe. Amari Evans is kind of another interesting piece in all of this. To me, it's so bizarre in that it's the same question that we had last year, just with a few different faces, right? And it's like, okay, Keandre Lambert-Smith transfers to Auburn. Dante Cephas didn't work out here, goes to K-State. So now you're saying, okay, Julian Fleming, like, let's see what you can do. But yeah, I mean, Caden Saunders is somebody who should be in the mix, but we hadn't seen that last year. We haven't really seen it at all during his time at Penn State. So does he turn the corner? It's anyone's guess. And I think that's what makes this receiving corps so much of an unknown, just because we haven't seen any of these guys ever really step up. I mean, you've seen probably the most proven guy is Trey Wallace, and we didn't see it last year. So you're banking on a lot of potential there.
Other side of the ball, this Penn State defense, I think, had an argument as the best defense in the country last year, certainly statistically. New coordinator now with Tom Allen replacing Manny Diaz as the head coach at Duke. Stylistically, anything different with Tom Allen? Or I know Tom Allen has like cute nicknames for some positions, but like schematically, is it going to look more or less like what we've seen from Penn State, which has been consistently a pretty good defensive team under James Franklin?
Yeah, I was going to hit on the cute nicknames, Bill, but you beat me to it. They're going to call some things differently than what they've been in the past, but nothing significant. To me, this is, and James Franklin even mentioned it last year when it was like, okay, Manny's going to Duke. We can't do anything to keep him here. He wants to be a head coach again. And Franklin said, like, realistically, I'm trying to hire someone who's going to be really good, and they're probably going to say a lot of positive things in their interview. But realistically, how do you improve upon a defense that was so good last year, right? That was one of the best in the country. So I think they're going to be really, really good again. I think it all kind of starts. You move Abdul Carter closer to the ball. I think that's going to be a lot of fun to watch, see him coming off the edge. But yeah, there shouldn't be anything too crazy. I think we will see them play more nickel. And also, again, there's depth and strength in this secondary. I think KJ Winston is going to be one of the best safeties, certainly in the conference, and I think one of the best nationally as well. So he's somebody who maybe we're not talking about enough, but your defensive ends, again, you're looking at a scenario where you say, okay, you lose two stud defensive ends in Chop Robinson and Adisa Isaac. You've completely reloaded by moving Abdul Carter closer to the ball, which he wanted to do. He initiated the position switch from linebacker. And then you pair him with Denai Dennis Sutton, who played a ton of football last year, essentially was a starter without the name recognition of being one. And you're set. So yeah, I think the defense is going to be really, really good yet again.
I think Abdul Carter is going to lead the country in sacks. Am I wrong? Am I crazy? Or are people?
You showing off that Philly bias, Bill?
Yeah, it might be. He camped. I've said this before. He camped at Ohio State, whatever, the couple summers ago. It's just as a linebacker. I don't think he did any defensive line stuff, but his dad went to the same high school as me, so we have a special connection. Me and the Carter family. Not really. They have no idea who I am, but I like him as a player.
Maybe they
and
will
a lot
after
of people
this
do.
podcast.
Yeah, maybe. I just like I'm very intrigued by them doing with Abdul Carter what they should have done with Micah Parsons.
Exactly. Like this is that third year of Micah Parsons that, everybody wanted to see Micah closer to the ball, all these things. Like you're going to see it now just with a different player, still going to wear number 11. Yeah. And to me, that's one of the greatest mysteries of the Franklin era of you had Micah Parsons and he was a linebacker, and then you had the COVID year in there. We never got to see that. Just bizarre all around. But yeah, I don't think you're completely off base with this, Bill. I think he's going to be really, really good. I think he's a special athlete. He's gotten even bigger. We saw him this summer, and it's like, oh, yeah, this guy looks like a big-time edge rusher. And part of the reason that Abdul said he wanted to switch positions was kind of looking at the next level and what those guys get paid, the production. And it makes sense. Like, I think this is a unique athlete who has the skills to do it. He's going to be highly disruptive wherever you put him. But I think the position switch is slightly overshadowing how good I think Denai Dennis Sutton is and is going to be this year. Yeah. I think that's kind of the other part of it. Because if it would have just been Denai Dennis Sutton and then like a rotation of guys that you're trying to figure out, I'd still say, yeah, this guy's going to have to be really, really good. But you put Carter on the other side, and I think you've just created a massive problem for opponents. So yeah, he's going to be Abdul Carter, one of the best players to watch in the country. So yeah, I don't think you're totally off base, Bill.
It is my Philly bias, I think. So is there like a question mark on defense? Is there anything that's concerning for Penn State on defense?
I mean, I think you could look a little bit at linebacker depth, maybe, but I still wouldn't be overly worried about it. Like, I think
Okay.
Tony Rojas is going to be a really, really good outside linebacker. Um, I think, Kobe King played a lot of football before, so I think you bank on that. I mean, they're pretty good up the middle. The secondary's talented. I think they were really wise with what they were able to do in the transfer portal in the secondary that, they threw a bunch of young guys in the fire in the Peach Bowl in the secondary and did not go particularly well. But you had a lot of opt-outs. You had a lot of things you were working around. So they went out, added A.J. Harris, the cornerback, who was previously at Georgia.
Yeah.
So again, this is only his second year of college football that he's going into. But long-term, like, you just got a player that had he signed with Penn State, people would have been losing their minds about because he's that good. I don't think there are really any questions. Maybe you could nitpick a little bit at linebacker, but I think they should be pretty good on defense.
You may have answered this already, maybe with Ty Warren, but I'm wondering is there a guy on this team right now that's not getting talked about a ton that you think will be someone who's sort of like in a national discussion come the time this game gets played in November, middle-ish to the end of the season?
You said this game gets played, and I thought you were referring to the EA Sports, the video game. I don't know the rankings yet. Yeah,
that's next week.
I think Tyler Warren for sure at tight end. KJ Winston at safety, I think, is another one who probably enough people aren't talking about right now, but I think they should be. You've got two of the best running backs in college football, but there's just so much with this offense that we don't know that you're kind of like, okay, Nick Singleton, Katron Allen. I will say I'll even go even deeper and say, their third running back, Quentin Martin Jr., true freshman, is a guy that I think is going to see the field and it's going to help them. I mean, this was one of the best players in their recruiting class this past year. So, yeah, they've got some kind of younger, under the radar guys as well. But yeah, Tyler Warren at tight end. I haven't seen anything yet, Bill, about Big Ten Media Days, but I would imagine he would be there for Penn State because it's kind of like James Franklin only ever likes to take seniors, and Warren had flirted with the NFL a little bit last year, but decided he wanted to come back and kind of show that he's an all-around guy. So maybe we'll get a chance to talk to him in Indianapolis if he's there. Maybe they'll bring the quarterback.
Would Julian Fleming represent Penn State at Media Days?
Typically, they don't bring transfers. They don't bring non-seniors. There's always time to change the rule, right? Like, you could bring Abdul Carter and...
Why would you bring your stars? No one wants to hear them talk.
Yeah. Nobody's interested in the stars here in Kings of Columbus or at Media Days.
That's right. I want to squeeze in one more question before we let you go. What happens if Penn State doesn't make the playoff this year? Like, how uncomfortable does that get for James Franklin?
I think it gets uncomfortable. I ultimately think nothing changes, though. I mean, I think you look at the buyout, I believe after this year, which I should have this memorized by now because I've written it a lot. I want to say it's $56 million after this year, maybe $57 million. I want to say 56 that Penn State would owe him if they parted ways without cause. So I think you're kind of just got to ride it out. I think that's, to me, that's the interesting part in all of this is what is success for this program? Because it's also like pretty cruel if you're Penn State and say you end up and you're like the 13th team, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah.
What happens in that scenario? Yeah, fans are going to be mad. They expected more. Again, I still think it's just not only get in the playoff, but actually win a game in the playoff to show that you can beat a marquee opponent. But ultimately, if that doesn't happen, I feel like this is kind of the best right now that both sides can do. You're a consistently good program, but are you a top 4 program? Are you a top 5 program? Are you a top 6 program? I don't think so, right? Like, if we were still in the 4-team playoff format, I wouldn't say that Penn State would be in that. And that's what's tough. I do think for fans, it's going to be more interesting because I'm not going to pick them to beat Ohio State. I can tell you that right now. After last year, I did, and they couldn't even move the ball down the field and made me look like a fool.
It's a great game. Yeah.
Yeah. I was like, you know, my whole thing was, all right, Ohio State's going to be down this year. You're going to have a chance. You know, I don't think Kyle McCord's going to be fantastic. Yeah. Well, it all blows up in my
You were
face.
right about the Kyle McCord part, but it didn't matter.
I was gonna say I got half of that right.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's just the offense around here for the last so many years. Like, Bill, I mean, when's the last time you've had fun watching a Penn State offense, just as a college football fan, right? Like, you probably have to go back to 16 or 17.
Yeah, 16, 17. Yeah.
And that's the thing. And I think fans are so much like, hey, like, we were so frustrated watching this offense last year that, like, please do anything differently this year. So I think that to me is kind of of where it hinges this year. But I did have a question for you, Bill.
Sure.
If I may.
You may.
What are your thoughts on Will Howard, and how does he feel going to the second most popular Downingtown high school?
I was gonna, yeah. Oh, you guys were opposite Downingtown high schools?
Opposite schools, yeah.
I wasn't. You were east and he was west.
Yes.
Okay, yeah. I wasn't sure about that. I feel good about Will Howard. I think Will Howard, like, he doesn't have like a first round ceiling. I don't think. I could be wrong on that. But I think he's like,
welcome to the world around here, Bill.
Yeah, but I think like
that's always been, yeah.
I think he's like a gamer. Like, I think Will Howard just like knows what to do to win, even if sometimes it doesn't look all that pretty. And I think it's almost like exactly what Ohio State might need this year, given everything else around him on the roster. So it'll be a different kind of quarterback, I think, than people are accustomed to seeing at Ohio State. Maybe more like JT Barrett-ish, than certainly like CJ Stroud or Justin Fields-ish, but good enough to get the job done, I think. And, you know, he's from the outskirts of Philadelphia, so he's got a toughness to him. He's got a toughness to him that you have to appreciate.
Yeah, there's some grit there for sure. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah. He's been to a Wawa a time or two. He knows.
Oh, definitely say that high school there's like a Wawa about a mile away, because I grew up closer to Downingtown West, but went to East. So fun way to tie this all together here. Penn State's presumed starting left tackle Drew Shelton was high school teammates with Will Howard at Downingtown West.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Who knew? Downingtown West was just churning out P5 football players.
Yeah. So, I mean, you had, and at the time, because Shelton was a tight end when he got to high school. So they might have even caught passes together but how is that, Bill? Penn State gets the Ohio quarterback. Ohio State ultimately gets the Pennsylvania guy.
Yeah. And I think they're hoping that the Pennsylvania. Oh, Kyle McCord's not a Pennsylvania guy. He's a Jersey guy, so never mind. I was going to make a comparison.
Yeah. He's not one of us. Yeah,
that's right. He went to high school in Philadelphia, but he doesn't get to claim Pennsylvania. All right. Penn State is an interesting team, I think, and has a really interesting opener at West Virginia, where I think we'll learn a lot about what Penn State's going to be all about in 2024. Look forward to following them, and then obviously look forward to Ohio State heading to Beaver Stadium in November. Audrey Snyder, thank you so much for joining us here on Kings of Columbus and sharing your expertise on the Nittany Lions.
You got it. Take care, Bill.
Pleased to be joined on Kings of Columbus by Aaron McMann. He covers Michigan for MLive.com. Aaron, we appreciate you joining us here to let us know a little bit more about Ohio State's rival, those Michigan Wolverines, team up north, as the folks around here like to call them. You call Ohio State the team down south, or you just call them Ohio State?
No, Ohio State. Occasionally, Michigan player will say team down south, but no, it's usually Ohio State or Ohio. We get that a lot too.
Oh, right, Ohio. Yeah, thank you, Brady Hoke, for that one. We appreciate you. Very interesting team, the Michigan Wolverines this year. So I want to start here. I guess, like, obviously, we're talking about the defending national champions. At the same time, Michigan's going through pretty big transition. With Jim Harbaugh leaving for the NFL and Sharon Moore taking over. So I personally don't have, Aaron, like a great handle on what exactly the expectations are for Michigan this year. Is it just sort of all gravy because they beat Ohio State 3 years in a row and they're coming off a national title? Or is there something to, like, listen, we showed we can do it and we want to reload. We're not rebuilding. We want to make another run at this thing this year.
Yeah, no, I think if you ask the fans, the expectation probably is to be, in the conversation, right? I think at the end of the year, if they can be, one game away from the Big Ten title and potentially, fighting for a spot in the playoff, I think that's realistic here in Ann Arbor. The fans are a little concerned, especially the offensive side of the ball, where they lost a lot. I mean, J.J. McCarthy's no longer here. Blake Corum's no longer here. Their two better receivers are gone. So there's a lot to replace it there. But I think optimistically, they look at the defense and what's coming back. They look at the infrastructure that's been in place that, yes, Jim Harbaugh left with, but You've got enough guys who've been in the system long enough, both players and coaches, where I think they expect this to certainly be, I think, a double digit win season, and then fighting for a spot in the playoff.
I realize that beating your rival 3 years in a row would imbue any team with a reasonable amount of confidence. But given that Michigan is kind of rebuilding or reloading, however you want to couch it, a little bit, and Ohio State seems like it's really gearing up to make a serious run with its roster at a national title this year. Do you have a sense yet for what the expectations are from the Michigan side of things for when Michigan and Ohio State meet again? Is Michigan thinking like, we've already beat this team, we don't care if they're positioned a little better maybe than we are right now, or is there some or fear or concern or whatever that maybe this 3-year run in the rivalry would just be a 3-year run?
I think the expectation is that they're going to go in there and try and win. I mean, there's no doubt about that. I think the confidence level is at an all-time high with this Michigan football program, not only coming off national championship, but as you said, beating Ohio State 3 years in a row. I think they've been able to see it done. Many of them may experience it getting done. So I think they believe in themselves. They can go in there and win the game. Now, if you step back and talk to quote unquote unbiased analyst, I think most people would say Ohio State has more talent this year. I mean, top to bottom, both sides of the ball. I think certainly Ohio State's favored to win that game at this point. I don't see that changing much throughout the season. So I think Ohio State's going to be the favorites going in, and Michigan will realize that. They'll probably use it to their advantage, with a, quote unquote chip on their shoulder, whatever you want to call it. But I think they do expect to win the game. I think, when you've done it 3 years in a row, you believe in yourselves and you think you can do it. So, from my perspective, I certainly think Ohio State's a better team. I would certainly give them the nod at this point. I'm really curious, given the, going back to the unknowns, I'm really curious to see how this Michigan team looks early in the year. We're going to find out early on because they have Texas week 2, how good Michigan is. And if they can be competitive in that game and or win it, then I think you're looking at, again, another potential undefeated season and the national championship possibility.
I do want to talk about Michigan's schedule in a little bit, because it's a little bit of a bear, or not a little bit. It is a bear. It's one of the tougher schedules in all of college football. But I want to go back to Sharon Moore, because I find the similarities between the spot that he finds himself in and how Ryan Day ascended to his current role to be interesting. Now, obviously, Ryan Day did not take over for a head coach that had just won the national championship, but Urban Meyer had a great run at Ohio State and did win a national championship a few years prior to Ryan Day taking over. And at the time, we all sort of wondered, like, okay, how is this going to be different, if at all, on the field, off the field? How are we going to know that this is like Ryan Day's program and not Urban Meyer's program? And I'm wondering now the same thing about Michigan is, have you gleaned anything from these first few months of the Sharon Moore era, or do you have any expectations, I guess, on how things may end up being different under him as opposed to under Jim Harbaugh?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's something I don't know if we've gotten a really good grasp of at this point. They're very different individuals, and you got to keep in mind too, they come in at different points. When Jim Harbaugh first got to Ann Arbor in 2015, it was, quite frankly, it was all about him, right? He was crisscrossing the country, doing those satellite camps, generating headlines nonstop. Part of it was scripted. Like, that's what he wanted. He wanted to generate interest in the Michigan program. They were struggling at that point. He wanted to get a leg up in recruiting. And Sharon's kind of taken a different approach. He's kind of almost in a way sat back and kind of led from behind, so to speak. He said on multiple occasions now that this Michigan program is about the players, not necessarily me. So it's not so much. And look, Sharon Moore doesn't have the name recognition that Jim Harbaugh had. That's something that's totally different too. So, I think in some ways, Sharon's going to look to replicate some of the things Jim Harbaugh did, the smash mouth style of play. I think the way they recruit, etc. I don't think it's going to change a ton. But I think his style and his approach to just being a head coach and being a CEO of a football program is a little bit different. He has worked to beef up the recruiting staff a little bit. I think he's going to take some more chances on guys that maybe Jim Harbaugh hadn't done in the past. But other than that, there hasn't been tangibly a ton of difference. Public facing. We'll see if that changes in the meantime. But right now, it's very much he's kind of been working behind the scenes to try and mold his program the way he wants it.
We'll get to more on the field stuff in a second, but you just reminded me that Sharon Moore and building his staff took 2 people from Ohio State, Tony Alford, the running backs coach, and Aaron Dunston, who was a recruiting coordinator here, but is going to be, I think, football ops at Michigan. Here, the reaction to that was, I can't believe that Ryan Day would ever allow anyone to go up there. How could anyone ever affiliated with Ohio State possibly go work for Michigan? What was the reaction in Michigan to Sharon Moore poaching a couple of staffers from Ohio State?
Yeah, I think that the dedicated fans, the ones that live on the internet, were probably pumping their fist, celebrating, just because they got to win, I guess, so to speak. But remember, I mean, it was just a few years ago. Michigan lost Greg Madison and Al Washington, Ohio State.
Right.
Al Washington was a little bit different story, but Madison, I think, at that point was a definitely a surprise. So I think in a way it's I guess payback. I guess I don't know what you want to call it, but no, I mean there were a lot of folks celebrating. There was at that point there was a lot of unknown with the running backs coaching position with Mike Hart, whether he was going to come back, whether he was going to leave, whatever the case may be. So I think if you weren't going to get Mike Hart back, to get an experienced guy on staff with Midwest ties and Midwest roots and can recruit and familiar with the Big Ten, I think certainly was a good thing. And I think from Sharon Moore's perspective too, he wants to surround himself with experienced dudes. He's done a decent job of that. Building out his staff. He brought in Wink Martindale from the NFL, familiar with their defensive system, been around a long time. So while he's new to the head coaching role, I think he tried to do a good job bringing in guys that have been around the block, for a while.
All right, let's talk quarterback here. Who do you think will be Michigan's starting quarterback week 1? And do you think it will be the same person, aside from injuries, when Michigan plays Ohio State?
Yeah, that's a really good question because we're kind of working on incomplete information here, right? I think coming out of spring, the assumption is Alex Orji is going to be the guy. He looked, I think, most well-rounded in the spring game. We heard the most out of him coming out of spring practice. And look, he fits the bill. He's 6'3", 235. He kind of gives Michigan, something in the ground game that he can kind of, he can do different things as opposed to being a statue back there and throwing the football. So all signs point to him. But I do wonder, Jack Tuttle, he's a former transfer from Indiana, has been around the Big Ten block a while. He's entering his 7th year, certainly the most experience on the roster. He was injured in the spring, didn't do much, didn't throw at all. But I got to wonder, there was a reason he came back. Michigan wants an experienced veteran on the roster. We saw a little bit of him last year in kind of mop-up duty as this number 2 guy. So I got to think it's going to be one of those 2 guys. It would not surprise me at all if Michigan starts the year with kind of a platoon situation where they start one and bring in the other. Like I could see them totally starting Jack Tuttle and bringing in Orji, maybe 3rd and short situation. It's kind of like how they used J.J. McCarthy a couple of years ago. But I think they've got some figuring out to do. I generally don't think there's a clear-cut front runner right now at this point. They're going to go into camp with 3 or 4 of these guys. And that's the thing too. Like there's, I think, genuinely 3 or 4 guys with the possibility of getting the nod. And a guy I haven't even mentioned yet, Davis Warren. I thought he looked the best in the spring game. So there's a lot of things going on here. I think it's come down to what type of quarterback they want, how they want to utilize him, and then they'll go from there. But it would not shock me at all, like you said, if week 1 the starter is not the starter come Ohio State week.
Let's assume, I guess, that it is Alex Orji. I there's not a lot to work off of in terms of sample size, but I've heard like comparisons, maybe like absolute best case scenario, maybe he's like a Jalen Milroe kind of quarterback. Like what if he's the guy? Let's just assume that he's the guy. How does that change, if at all, how Michigan's offense might look in 2024?
Yeah, it's a good question. And the assumption, if he is the guy, I think they'll be, ground based. I don't think you're going to see a ton of shots down the field. I don't necessarily know if he's the accuracy or the arm strength to do it. I've seen him throw a couple times now, and I'll be honest, it hasn't been pretty. He's inaccurate. He'll overthrow receivers. Doesn't seem to have the cannon for an arm that maybe you would want out of a starter. So they would have to do things, more wildcat situations, more, getting him outside the pocket and doing some things on the ground. And I think that would be Michigan's best chance there. Now, look, it kind of jives with what they've been able to do the last couple of years with the big beefy offensive linemen, multiple tight ends, running backs, etc. But at some point, you got to wonder if that would, that would come kind of crashing down on them if the defense can able to figure them out and take them down to the first tackle. So a lot of unknowns at this point. I think that's probably the biggest concern from the Michigan fan base is who's going to be a quarterback and are they up for the job? Are they capable? I think some fans wanted them to go to the transfer portal in the offseason to get a quarterback. They didn't do it. They felt like they have enough there on the roster to get by. But until we see it, it's tough to say. I mean, Orji's only attempted, I think, 1 pass in his Michigan career. There's a reason, I think, for that. So we'll see how things stand. He does have a fall camp to figure it out, but they've got multiple guys that got to figure out here.
Michigan has been, I would say, well, I don't know. The defense has maybe been the driving force of the program, but offensively, I think it's been a program that's been driven by the offensive line. obviously reshaping a lot of things up there. You have a head coach, Jerome Moore, who's the former offensive line coach and has that in his background. Is there just a level of confidence in Jerome Moore's ability to develop that maybe offensive line is not so much of a concern, or is it a concern given how many new faces that Michigan could have up there this year?
Yeah, no, I think the fan base in general thinks they can get it done. You got to remember, a lot of these guys projected to start the offense line. They've been in this Michigan program now 3-4 years. Kind of guys have been waiting their turn. Maybe they've been passed over by a transfer they brought in last year, whatever the case may be. So I think the starting five should be fine. It may not look like the Michigan offensive line you'd seen years past in terms of just the sheer numbers, but I think they have enough to make it work. I think what Michigan's offensive line was why they're so successful last couple years was the depth they had, especially last year. They generally went into last fall thinking they had 9 or 10 starters, and that was one of the reasons why they were dealt with injuries quite a bit last year, and it wasn't the same 5 every game, and they were still able to make do. If injuries hit this year, I don't know if that's going to be the case. If they're going to be able to have the same type of guys kind of stepping up and filling their shoes, but I think the first 5 are fine. You got seniors and a couple of redshirt juniors there ready. So it's going to be interesting to see. I do think maybe this line might be a little bit better equipped in pass protection, but again, that kind of goes against everything I was saying with the quarterback. So they're kind of got a lot going on here, a lot to figure out, and I think camp is going to be key for that stuff.
One more question on the offense. So Donovan Edwards is like unequivocally running back 1 now. It seemed to me like maybe he struggled a bit last year, like kind of finding his footing as probably RB2 or 1A or 1A 1B with Blake Corum. Now that he's the man, and there's no questions about that, and I imagine he's going to get the lion's share of the carries. Is there an expectation that we see the best of Donovan Edwards this year?
Yeah, I would think so. You got to remember, going into last year, he was at this point last year, he was talking NFL. He was talking equal carries with Blake going into 2023. None of that materialized. Blake was by far their bell cow guy. He was the guy they wanted. They felt most comfortable with. And Donovan's had some big moments in big games, but his problem has been able to putting it together on a week-to-week basis. He hasn't been reliable on a carry-to-carry, week-to-week basis, and that's something I think Michigan's looking for this fall, expecting. Donovan said he struggled at times with not being, the maybe 1A guy or 1B guy last year when Blake got all the accolades and everything. So this is certainly going to be Donovan's year to shine. I mean, he's going to get a bulk of the carries. Michigan's got probably 2 or 3 running backs they believe in, trust. But by and far, I mean, Donovan Edwards is the one guy. I mean, he's probably going to get, I'd say 80 to 85% of the carries per game. And it's going to be on him to make the most of it. Yes, he's had big moments against Ohio State and the Washingtons and the Rose Bowls and everything else, but he's got to put together on a week-to-week basis to keep this offense going, because as we were talking about earlier, I do think they're going to be, very much reliant on the ground game, and that means picking up yards when you necessarily don't have them. And that's been a struggle of his in, the last year or two.
On defense, I think people know like Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, Will Johnson, obviously. I think Jayshon Barham was a really interesting transfer for them at linebacker. Ernest Hausman, I think, is going to be a good linebacker. Where are the questions personnel-wise on defense, if there are any? Is it safety and maybe the other corner spot?
Yeah, that's fair. They lost one of their starting safeties, Rod Moore, this spring to an ACL injury. He's not expected to be back until maybe the second half of the season. So they got to kind of plug and play with that position there. But it's probably the middle of secondary, and then that probably is it. I mean, they're deep at linebacker. You mentioned the defensive tackles. They probably don't have the depth that they've had the last couple of years at edge rusher. Although their 2 starters were guys that played about equal snaps last year. So maybe lack of depth in certain areas, and then in the secondary. But I thought they did a good job in the offseason of adding some guys from the portal. They had 2 corners and 2 safeties this offseason. So I feel like they're in a good spot. Some of these guys, one of them's cornerback from Albany, Amir Hall, FCS All-American, maybe a little undersized, but I'm really curious to see how he translates to the Big Ten level. They've got a transfer from UNLV who started quite a bit, and then you got the transfer safety, Jaden Mangum, all Big Ten guy from Michigan State. I think they're going to lean on him quite a bit too. So depth-wise, I think they'll be in a decent spot, but they got to figure that out. I mean, that was the backbone of their defense last year, secondary, especially the nickel and the corners.
Yeah.
If they can get that type of production this year, I think they'll be in good shape. As you mentioned, the front should be really good. They're expecting big things from Mason Graham, Kenneth Grant, both preseason All-Americans. They got some. They feel like they've got enough up there to make it work.
Yeah, Mike Sainer still to me just seems like somebody's gonna be really difficult to replace. I don't know. I don't really know that he got enough attention for how important he was to what Michigan wanted to do defensively the last couple of years.
No, you're absolutely right. That's probably another question mark for them. They got one guy they've kind of penciled in right now, Zeke Berry. He's a junior, but he hasn't played a ton. Apparently had a good spring, so coaches have been talking him up quite a bit. So I think they're going to look at him at nickel, and if not, they'll probably look at one of those corners they brought in from the transfer portal to kind of fill that spot. But you're right. I mean, Mikey Samuelsville was a guy who, incredible story. I mean, he came to Michigan as a receiver. Yes, he had experience playing defensive back, but I think everyone thought his speed was going to translate in the offensive side of the ball. He voluntarily moved to the other side. It was Jim Harbaugh's idea, and it worked out. I mean, he was one of the better playmakers they've had in a long time. Not only that, but his leadership perspective. I can't tell you how many times last year, some of the players in defense, especially in secondary, were saying, "Hey, Sanders still is helping me out with this. I was watching with that. And I was following him here." I don't know if they have that type of player on this Michigan roster on the defense side of the ball, but I think there's enough talent there. I think to make do.
I think maybe the biggest coaching hire anyone has made, like in the last 5 years, was Jim Harbaugh hiring Mike McDonald to run the defense and reshape Michigan's defense. And obviously a lot of carryover with Jesse Minter. And now you have Wink Martindale coming in, who probably considers himself like the architect of the whole thing, even though he wasn't running it in Ann Arbor. He was doing it in Baltimore. So is this just a seamless transition to another guy who's familiar with the scheme, or are there any concerns with the fact that Wink Martindale, I think he's 20 plus years out of college football, and whether or not he's able to kind of adapt to that game?
Yeah, when his first press conference, he declared himself the OG of the system. So I think that was it makes sense. The transition makes sense, right? Like, I think if you're Sharon Moore, you've been in the Michigan program now since 2018. You're familiar with the defense and what they're trying to do. So I don't think they wanted wholesale changes on that side of the ball, and they're not going to get it. This is very much from what we've been told. It's going to be a similar system to what they've been running the last couple of years. If you look at Wink's track record, he likes to blitz a little bit more than what Jesse Minter and Mike McDonald were doing the last couple of years. So that may be the one difference. Don't be, Wink comes from a background of coaching linebackers, so it would not surprise me if he tries to do some different things with the middle guys over the middle. Maybe blitz them a little bit more, or drop him back, whatever the case may be. But I think you're going to see largely the same system. They'll probably throw some wrinkles and do some different things. But what made this thing so good the last couple of years is the disguising. Especially last year, Jesse Minter did a very good job of kind of not tipping his hand for opposing offense and what they were trying to do, and getting guys to buy in and get comfortable within the system and make plays. And that's ultimately what's worked. There was a little hesitancy when Wink came in, because you're right. He's been a long time since he's been in the college game. Hadn't recruited in a long time. We didn't know if he was going to do that. By all accounts, he's been a willing participant in all that stuff. And so we'll see how things go. I think and there was also, criticism too of, could this be, Don Brown 2.0, right? Where Wink comes in and wants to blitz nonstop and give up the big plays and everything else. And he's trying to assure people that's not the case. It's not what he's trying to do. So while I think Michigan will blitz a little bit more this year, I don't think it's going to be all out like Don Brown, circa 2019.
I'm sure Ohio State fans and Ryan Day and Chip Kelly would not mind a return to the Don Brown stylings, but we'll see whether or not that happens. I have two more questions for you, Aaron. One, who is someone who on Michigan's roster who maybe has not gotten a lot of attention in the offseason, or someone who's just not being talked about for whatever reason, who you think is going to be incredibly important to what Michigan wants to get done in 2024?
Yeah, I'll give you a couple guys, one on each side of the ball. One name hasn't come up on offense, tight end Colson Loveland. I don't necessarily know if he's flown on the radar because he's a preseason All-American, but I think he's going to be a key to the Michigan offense this year. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he finishes the season as their leading pass catcher. They're going to use him a ton. He's just a big dude and so talented. And I think that the public saw that the last couple of years, but I do think Michigan's going to utilize him a ton. Defensively, you mentioned linebackers earlier, and I think Ernest Hausman's an intriguing guy. Came to Michigan last year from Nebraska. The intention originally was for him to start, but one of the linebackers didn't end up leaving, Michael Barrett, for the NFL. So he kind of had to wait his turn last year, and they kind of used him as like a 2B middle linebacker. He's going to get thrust into the starting spot this year. I expect him to have a big year alongside Jayshon Barham, as you mentioned, the transfer from Maryland too. I think collectively can be probably two of the better middle linebackers in the Big Ten.
And we'll end here. You touched on the schedule earlier. So Michigan opens with Fresno State, which is a good G5 team. It's a team that might be in contention for that G5 playoff spot. Texas week 2, USC and Oregon at home, at Washington. No Penn State, which is a nice miss for them. I just lay that all out to ask you, what kind of shape do you maybe expect Michigan to be in when it plays Ohio State, given the kind of the gauntlet that it needs to go through to get there in the first place.
Yeah, I think what helped them the last couple of years was just how deep they were on both sides of the ball. They were able to withstand injuries and withstand, some of the things they went through this season. I don't know if they have the top tier depth that they have, so it's going to be. I'm curious to see how they get through the season, especially last year. They had such a weak non-conference schedule. They were kind of able to build up, and like Will Johnson didn't start the first 3 or 4 games last year because they were kind of saving him for the end of the year, so they didn't get injured. And they did that with several guys. They can't do that this year. You mentioned Fresno State week 1, Texas week 2. They opened the Big Ten slate again at Washington. So that slow ramp up, that non-conference schedule that they were able to kind of to mosey on through last year just isn't there. So it's more of a gauntlet this year, no doubt about it. I don't know if they'll be in the type of shape that they were last year going into Ohio State week. I think that could leave them a little bit more exposed. But it's going to come down, I think, ultimately the quarterback, the ceiling of some of these guys. Orgy has a high ceiling, people think, but we just haven't seen a ton of it. So, and Jack Tuttle, who could potentially start as well, he's been banged up the last couple of years and dealt with injuries too. So I think if Michigan can go into that game relatively healthy, they'll have a good shot, and it wouldn't surprise me if they won. If they go in there banged up and it's proven through the season they don't have the depth that they've had, it could be a long game. So I think the Vegas total was set and the win total was set 9.5. That sounds about right. I could see 10-2. I could see 9-3. But as I said at the beginning, I think a successful season for Sharon Moore this fall is going into that Ohio State game, maybe with a chance to play for a Big Ten championship and a chance to get in the playoff. And I think if all that, I think it's a success.
Yeah, it's going to be. I think Michigan is among the most interesting teams in college football this year, not just because they're defending national champs, but it's just a test of the program and how they're able to handle some transition and adversity. So I'm eager to see how that plays out. I know Ohio State fans will be following along all season as they keep an eye toward that last Saturday in November. But for now, Aaron, we appreciate you joining us and lending some of your insight to our listeners about Michigan, and maybe we'll catch up with you during the season. But for now, we appreciate it. Thanks again for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thank you again to Tyson, Audrey, and Aaron for joining us. Again, you can follow Tyson's work at the I-5 Corridor, Audrey's at The Athletic, and Aaron's at mlive.com. Those are the 3 games that are going to, kind of make or break Ohio State's season. Does Ohio State need to win all 3 of them? No. Do you want Ohio State to win all 3 of them? Of course. They're going to come with different challenges for the Buckeyes. And again, like that Oregon game, man, it feels like it's shaping up to be the biggest regular season, like non-Michigan game that I've been around. I've been covering Ohio State since 2014, as I said, when I was talking to Tyson. And it's just, this game feels different. I don't know if that's just because Oregon's new and shiny or if it's the recruiting battles that seem to be happening between the 2 programs, or maybe it's just the obvious that both have, no doubt about it, national title aspirations this year. We'll get to see them play in October and perhaps a couple more times throughout the 2024 season. We'll have to see how that plays out. But I hope this was informative. If you were at all curious about what's going on with the 3 toughest opponents on Ohio State's schedule, hopefully we provided you with some information on those teams, and you are now a little bit smarter about Oregon, Penn State, and Michigan. As I said, Doug is out in Las Vegas for Big 12 Media Days, covering stuff for Kings of the North. Again, please check that out. Separate channel, separate podcast feed. But we appreciate you guys supporting that and checking out the coverage there. And then we should have a regular Kings of Columbus with the 2 of us again next week. And then certainly when we get out to Indianapolis for Big Ten Media Days, I'm sure we'll have a Kings of Columbus from there as well, in addition to everything else you've come to expect from our crew here at the podcast. So thanks for watching this episode of Kings of Columbus. I'm Bill Landis. We'll talk to you later.